Okay, so welcome to topic 8.3, which is population ecology. If you'll remember what population is, it is a group of individuals of the same species. I have some populations on here. I have a little population of fruit flies down here in the corner, population of elephants over here on the right. I use those two distinct examples because they represent two different types of growth. So if you look on the left here, this is our fruit fly culture, which you guys are already familiar with. They will typically go through something that's called exponential growth, which means that their population will grow exponentially and very quickly. Logistic growth model, which we will talk about in the video after this one, describes something like a large mammals, elephants being a good example of a species that maybe doesn't grow very quickly, but is able to maintain a population size due to a carrying capacity or limit, and the population size tends to hover around this limit. Okay, so before we can get into logistic growth, I want to talk about exponential growth, and there's some relevant formulas on your formula sheet. I'm just going to pull over the formula sheet here so you guys can see where to find these formulas. Here's a copy of your formula sheet. Rate and growth. It's in this box right here. You're going to see a bunch of formulas. The two we are going to be dealing with in this video are the population growth and exponential growth formulas. So just keep that in mind. I have them written on the slide here. And here they are up in the corner. Whoops. Go back. Okay, so sorry about that. First formula we have is dn over dt equals b minus d. Now you might look at that and say, well, what is dn over dt? dn over dt is simply the change in population. I'm just going to put change in pop over the change in time. Over the change in time. Okay? So the change in population over the change in time is equal to b. I should have put b down here, but I'm going to put this down. Over here it says this on your formula sheet also. B is births. And D, as you might guess, represents deaths. So let's go ahead and work on a problem up here. Just dealing with this first formula, dn over dt is equal to b minus d. So we have a population of 166 squirrels, and you have observed 77 births and 42 deaths in a year's time. What is the change in population in this year? When it says change in population in this year, what it means is the change in population number over the change in time that year. So that's going to be dn over dt. And as we know, this equals to births minus deaths. So we can fill in a couple of these numbers here. Let's go. dn over dt, that's what we're looking for. Births minus deaths, how many births did we see? 77 minus 42, right? We can subtract that. Let me subtract that real quick. Make sure to use your calculator in these scenarios because you can make simple mistakes and they can cost you. 35. Okay, so the change in population, dn over dt, is equal to 35. That's the amount of individuals added to this population this year. 35 individuals. Okay, so now we want to find out what the per capita growth rate is. Per capita is a fancy way of saying per individual. So what is the growth rate per individual? Well, that number that we're looking for is over here, R max. This is the per capita growth rate. Growth rate. Again, this assumes that there's nothing that's going to influence the growth rate like limited resources or a shrinking habitat, something like that. Per capita growth rate is R max. So it wants to know what the per capita growth rate is in this time period. So we have solved one thing over here, that is dn dt, which is 35. Now we need to find R max. Well, why don't we take a look at this formula over here and let's try using this. Let's see what it is. dn over dt is equal to R max n. So if I want to find R max, how do I isolate n? Well, I'm going to divide by n. Both sides. Right? So, use my eraser over here. R max is going to equal dn over dt all over just n. So what is dn over dt? Well, we just solved that. That's 35 individuals. So 35 individuals. Over the entire population, how big is the population size? It says in the question here, N is 166. So 35 over 166 is going to give us our R max. Let's calculate that. Go ahead and calculate that in a calculator, and we'll see if you got it right. So, should have got something like 0.21. So R max would equal, for this situation, R max equals 0.21. Okay, so now we've got multiple little pieces here. We have a growth rate, right? We have our dn over dt. Now, what can we do with what we have so far? Assuming we have limitless resources, how many squirrels will there be in 2 more years? This is a bit more difficult of a question. I'm going to pause and erase everything, and then we will start on the second part of this question. So make sure you can calculate this first part. Go ahead and pause it if you need to follow along, and then I will start it back up with a clean sheet here. Okay. Okay. So hopefully you were able to follow me along that first in that first video, or that first portion of this video up to this point. So if you remember, we have an R max, which we've calculated already to be 0.21. Right? So dn over dt we calculated as well. And dn over dt was, if I remember correctly, I don't remember actually. Go back, hold on one second. Okay, so dn over dt was 35, and the total population size was 166. Right? So I usually do this in chart form because I think it's easier to understand. So let's go ahead and start. 166. R max is 0.21. dn over dt is 35. Okay. So the first thing we've calculated this. We know what the population was originally. We know how much it grew by, and we know the rate at which it's growing. We know the rate at which this is growing. So assuming exponential growth, there's nothing messing with this at all. We can go ahead and add 166 to 35. And that's going to give us the amount of individuals in the next generation, which ends up being 201, right? So this growth right here is after 1 year, after first year. We want to go 2 more years. So what we have to do is take 201, multiply it by our per capita growth rate, because we know how this is growing, times 0.21. That's going to give us about 42.21. We'll just round that to 42. Okay, and then in order to get another year's worth of growth, we add 42 to 201. So let's take 201 plus 42, and we're going to get 243 for the next generation. 243. Here's the growth after second year. After second year. Okay, 0.21, still our same growth rate. 243 times 0.21. It's going to give us about 51 individuals, 51.03. Okay, so let's add these one more time. 243 plus 51 is going to give us 294. This is really all the information you need, because we are looking for after the third year. After third year. First year, second year, and third year. It says 2 more years, right? So after the third year, we should have, all things being equal, 294 individuals in this squirrel population if it is growing exponentially. Now, the key thing to notice about this is your dn over dt. In other words, the amount of individuals added per year is increasing. I want you to pause and think about that and come up with a hypothesis for yourself. Why is this number increasing? And then I'll tell you once you unpause. So, hopefully you're back with me. The reason this number is increasing, and I hope you came to the same conclusion, is that as your population gets bigger, there are more individuals that are going to be added every year. This is why this is considered an exponential growth curve, because if I was to draw a graph with time on the bottom, pop size on the y-axis, if I was to draw a graph like this, over time, what's going to be happening is you're adding, it's not a linear growth curve, right? It's not going to be like this. You're adding more individuals every year, so I'm just going to erase that. Every year, since you add more, you have an exponential growth curve, something that shoots up very sharply. Now, is this sustainable? No, this is not sustainable sustainable. You're not going to be able to maintain this kind of growth rate indefinitely. Species that do this are typically called, and this is important, I would definitely write this down on your key terms, R-selected. R-selected species. They are R-selected because this R, or this R max, right? This is what determines how fast they grow. How fast is their rate of growth? We'll compare that in the next video to K-selected species, which are determined by something that we haven't discussed yet. But you can write it off to the side and maybe ponder it for a bit, and we'll come back and discuss it later. I hope this makes some sense. I'll have some more practice problems for you in class. Thank you for listening.